We're going to look at adding and subtracting decimals, and our goal is just that we can add and subtract decimals, both positive and negative. So when working with negative values, I'm going to always suggest, not the only way to do this, but my suggestion is to first make it an addition problem. So for example, if we have 5 minus 7, I'm suggesting we turning that into 5 plus negative 7. Now I know those are not decimals, but the same idea is true. We add the opposite to turn it into an addition problem. And I only suggest this because we tend to make less mistakes if we think of a problem in this way, but it is completely up to you. And if we have both positive or both negative, we're going to just add our numbers together, just like with their integer rules. But if we have one of each, one's positive and one's negative, then we're going to subtract. Again, just like our integer rules. So the fact that we have a decimal in here does not change how we work with integers. So some key things first is which number goes on top. Well, if we look, for example, at 2 plus 3, well, 2 plus 3 is 5, but 3 plus 2 is also 5. So when we're adding, it doesn't matter how I add, what order I add it, I'm going to get the same answer. But the same is not true for subtraction. 3 minus 2 is 1, but 2 minus 3 is negative 1, so not the same. So we do need to have a rule for when we're subtracting. So which number goes on top? Well, when subtracting, we want the bigger number on top. Okay, so when we're subtracting, we want to put the bigger number on top. For adding, doesn't matter. And then where does the decimal go? We're just going to bring it straight down. So we bring it straight down from where it is because we have to make sure we line that decimal up in order to set our problem up. So we're going to say, don't forget, line up the decimal. And when we're all done, really important, check the sign. So it means, is our answer positive or negative, which we check at the end. So let's get this first one set up. So I have a negative and a positive. One positive, so I have one of each. We're going to follow this rule. We're going to subtract. And we said we're going to subtract with a bigger number on top. So that's a 12.92. So 12.92. That means the 8.7 goes on the bottom. But like we said here, we have to line up the decimal. So then that's going to be 8.7. Notice I'm not putting the negative. I don't need to worry about the positives or negatives right now. I'm just following my rules. I know they're different signs, so I have to subtract, which means bigger number goes on top. I'm going to put a 0 here for a placeholder. Had to line up those decimals, so I end up with an empty space there. And I'm going to just subtract. 2 minus 0 is 2. 9 minus 7 happens to also be 2. We said we're going to bring that decimal straight down. I can't do 2 minus 8, so I'm going to borrow and make that a 0 to make that 12. 12 minus 8 is 4. We're almost done. So we get 4.2, but now we're going to check our sign. So think back to integer rules, back at those notes if we need to. We're going to take the sign of the bigger number, or the larger absolute value. So the bigger number here is the 12.92, and it's positive. So So that means it's going to be positive. Now you don't have to write a plus sign to show positive. We just know that it is positive. Let's look at our next example. I've got a negative 5.3 plus a negative 2.86. So they're the same sign, both negative. So both positive, both negative. We're going to follow this. We're just going to add. So when we're adding, it doesn't matter which one. I still tend to put the bigger one on top. And we're going to line up the decimal. So 5.13, line up the decimal, 2.86. Again, I'm not worrying about putting the negatives into my problem. I'll deal with that at the end. I've got the decimals lined up. I tend to always put the bigger number on top, just because then I'm in the habit of that when I get to those subtraction problems. So in this one we subtracted, I'm going to write that here. In this one we're adding. So we just add down. 3 plus 6 is 9. 1 plus 8 happens to also be 9. Drop the decimal straight down. 5 plus 2 is 7. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to check our sign. So they were both negative, and we're going to keep that same sign using our integer rules. So the answer is negative 7.99. Now both of these examples were addition problems. So let's look at one more. What if it had been maybe a problem like this? Negative 2.3 minus negative 1.5. Well, we're going to follow our integer rules, and that tells us I'm going to change this into an addition problem. We're going to do this first step here. So I'm going to change this to adding. That makes this a positive. Add the opposite. So what I really have here is negative 2.3 plus 1.5. So what looked like a subtraction problem is an addition problem. But when we come over here and we follow our rules, we see that, well, I've got one positive and one negative. So I actually am still going to subtract. So I would have to subtract 2.3 minus 1.5. Notice I put that bigger number on top because I'm subtracting. And then I would just go ahead and subtract down. I can't do 3 minus 5, so I borrow. The 2 becomes a 1. That makes that a 13. I can do 13 minus 5 is 8. Bring that decimal straight down. 1 minus 1 is 0. I don't have to put the 0. 0.8 and 0.8 are the same thing. Now I look at my signs. So we always want to check the sign at the end. Which one is bigger? Well, 2.3 is bigger than 5.1, and it's negative. So my answer has to be negative. So if they were to be a subtraction problem, turn it into addition and decide, are they both positive or both negative, or do you have one of each? Follow those same integer rules. It might not be a bad idea to have those notes out next to you while you're working through these types of problems with decimals.